let's shift to a few practical tips that we could offer listeners. First of all, and I know this is a massive question and probably unfair for that reason, but how do people find the right story to tell?
Okay. Again, let's caution the word right.
Okay, let me rephrase the question. How do people tell a story that is appropriate for their goals and
I'm not
the
even a
audience
fan
in
of
the
the
moment?
word the word appropriate.
Okay, I'm going to
All
keep
right.
trying, and we're going to keep all this in, Annette, because I want people to see how much work it is to get this right.
Good.
How do people come up with a story that will hopefully resonate in an honest and authentic way with their audiences?
Okay, so we're finding stories, we're not creating stories. So finding stories, and the 4 buckets is my most practical. A story about a mentor, a story about a book or a movie, a story about a time I shined, or a story about a time I blew it. Okay, so this is where to go. But the rationale behind it is that there are a finite number of universal dilemmas that we have as humans. And when we tell a story about a universal human dilemma, we have a very high chance of really connecting with somebody because they've experienced the exact same thing in a different situation. And so the way I come up with stories is I start with, what story am I telling myself about my audience? Because if I tell myself that my audience is a bunch of hard asses who aren't going to accept anything but, data, well, then that's not a very nice story to be telling yourself about your audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I start. Is and the way I do it is if I'm going to give a keynote, I call 3 people who work there and ask them to tell me stories about what it's like to work there. And usually I'll find, if not, sometimes I can share their story exactly. But most of the time what I do is, if the story is, sounds like you can't win, if that's the story that I get from these people, then I find a story where I felt like I just couldn't win. And so they recognize that I do know what situation they're in. I'm not betraying any confidence, but I'm illustrating that I did my homework.
I love what you said about assessing your own motives or headspace regarding your audience and using that as the starting point, that maybe you have to get your own story straight about who your audience really is and question your prior assumptions. I
think it's the place to start. It's where I start is what am I telling myself about these people? And is it true? And what's actually more true? Do a little research, and then you can demonstrate the way you value them. So to a certain extent, any story we tell, and I'm thinking right now about the first story as you stand up to do a TED Talk or whatever, what we're hoping to result is that the key response we're trying to get is, oh my gosh, she's like me, or she's been through what I've been through, and so when we do that, that's where we really connect with that thick bandwidth where. And you never tell people what it is you want to inform them with until you have that bandwidth connection. And so a lot of people just launch into their data, and it just falls into the abyss because there's no connection.
Yes. I want to ask a question about the biggest mistakes you see storytellers make, because storytelling is in itself an art. It's something we can cultivate and become better at doing. And I'm often struck that 2 people might have the exact same fact set, and one of them turns that into a really exciting story, and one of them tells it in such a way that leaves the audience completely uninspired.
Right.
So what are the mistakes you see, and what are the remedies to fix them?
Well, the number one mistakes, and I have this, I added 2 new chapters to my book, The Story Factor. So the 3rd edition has these 2 new chapters in there where I actually go through each of the templates that people are using that narrow the bandwidth unintentionally. Because when we want certainty, we come up with templates where there's no struggle involved. Which is, first you have a character, then you have a challenge, then you have, the rise and fall twice, and then the resolution. Well, that means that every story you tell is going to be just as boring as the story I just told you. So what we want to look at the organic source of sense making. And here's my opinion about storytelling is storytelling is evolution's method for passing down the DNA of how to survive. And so it's not about these formats that have come from theater. Not that, I'm not knocking them that come from theater, but when we only use that template for our story, we end up with a very tight and very controlling story that takes a paradox and cuts it in half because there's this clear resolution at the end. Stories, when you don't tell somebody what to think, they feel like they've been invited to think for themselves.
Thanks for watching this video clip of the Speak Good podcast. If you'd like to hear the complete episode, please check out your favorite podcast directory and subscribe now. Thanks for watching.